I have split power systems into three categories: individual, universal, and expansive. In an individual power system, each person has their own unique ability that has little connection to the next person. This one ability is given to them by the author. In a universal power system, the system has a consistent trait and usually rules used by all other users of the power system. An expansive power system is always a universal power system because of the energy source used to activate the powers, but it also has the feature of having a skill tree. Power systems that are individual types are devil fruits and quirks. Each devil fruit gives the user a unique set of abilities. No character can have the same power as another, and these powers cannot be learned. Devil fruits also have very little connection to one another in terms of abilities. They have three categories and the weakness of seawater, but apart from those small similarities, the powers usually function in unique ways, especially paramecia. Logia and Zoan have similarities, like all Logias can turn into their element and all Zoans can move between human and animal form, but not enough to make them feel like a united system. Quirks also have the same abilities. Each character has their own unique ability, and although there are three categories as well, the quirk factor is the only thing connecting one ability to the next. There aren't really any universal set of rules. Power systems can also be a mix of multiple types. Ones that are partially individual are stands, curse techniques, nen, and chakra. For stands, each stand is given a unique ability that most of the time only they can use. The power has its own unique set of rules that only it abides by. For curse techniques, innate and inherited techniques are individual. Innate can only be used by the specific character, while inherited are restricted to a family line. For nen, hatsu has this property. Each hatsu is unique to the user and usually can't be copied. For chakra, this can be seen in Kekkei Genkai. There are bloodline abilities limited to users of the clan and can't be copied or used by outsiders. Power systems that are universal are stands, alchemy, and triggers. For stands, nearly all stands have a ghost, and if not, they usually have some kind of physical manifestation like a sword or hair. Stands can only be touched by another stand and are invisible to non-stand users. Stands can only move a limited distance away from their user, and they get weaker the further away they move. These are some of the universal rules that govern the power system. For alchemy, it almost always requires a transmutation circle, even if the circle is made by clapping. It also requires the alchemist to use the 3 steps of comprehension, deconstruction, and reconstruction. For borders triggers, all triggers are available to all border agents. All of the triggers also follow the rule of Treon usage. The Treon bodies have a max limit of 8 triggers, 4 on each hand. Systems that are expansive are chakra, nen, and jujutsu. Expansives are usually universal because they have some kind of energy source like mana or chi that allows the users to use the power. But the most defining trait of an expansive power system is what I would call a skill tree. There is a starting point that all users begin from, but then there are many branches that come out after. Some branches are available to all, but just require training, while some branches are individualistic. This usually means that a greater understanding of the power system will make a combatant more skillful. Chakra has chakra as its energy source. By itself, chakra can do things like allow users to walk on water, walk up trees, or stick to kunai. There are universal concepts like chakra, chakra points, and hand signs. For actual jutsu, chakra has many branches. General jutsu like substitution and body flicker are available to everyone. There's also branches for ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu. Under ninjutsu, there's shape and nature transformation, and so forth. The only branches that are individualistic are clan jutsu to a degree, and Kekkei Genkai. For nen, there is nen as the energy source, and by itself, it can perform techniques like ten, ren, setsu, and hatsu. Characters can learn even higher levels and go down branches like kyo, in, en, shu, ko, ken, and ryu. There are also universal concepts like aura and aura nodes. For hatsu, characters have their individual branch, but can learn new abilities with their initial technique and mix other nen types into their moves. For example, Gon is an enhancer, but he branched out to rock, paper, scissors, with each of them having a different nen type. For curse techniques, curse energy is the energy source. By itself, it can be used as reinforcement to make a person stronger or faster. Cursed energy also flows with physical attacks, allowing the opponent to predict them. Each character has their individual innate or inherited technique, but all techniques have universal branches. These are a reverse curse technique and domain expansion. They just need to be learned. There are also general techniques like simple domain and curtain that anyone can learn. In summary, the 3 types of power systems are individual, universal, and expansive. Power systems can have elements of multiple types or be restrained to one. This video was suggested by one of my patrons. It's difficult to pinpoint exactly what makes a good power system, so I'll talk about the traits that I think are good when they show up in a power system. Not all of these will be necessary to be considered good, but they are definitely welcome when they show up. Here is the Umeskian approach to making a good power system. The foundation of any power system is the special moves. What can the characters do? Nailing this is one of the most important parts. This should be cool and creative. Goku firing a blue beam from his hands is definitely cool, but by the end of DBZ, everyone is firing beams from their hands, and that's about the only thing that the system has to offer. This creativity can be tackled in two ways: giving characters a large amount of special moves, or having characters use the universal special moves in unique ways. For the first example, individual power systems always do this. Each character has a move that only they can use, but expansive power systems do this in a different way. Instead, there is a larger library of moves that characters can choose from. Both strategies will result in a lot of unique powers. The second way would be like in alchemy. Every single character transmutes because that is the only power available, but they all transmute in unique ways. Some create fire, some create explosions, and some manipulate earth. Individual triggers also do this. Take Scorpion for example. Kitora created the leg blade, Kageura created Mantis, and Yuma created the Shuriken. It's all the same weapon, but different ways of using it. Hamon also tapped into this a little in part 2. Everyone had Hamon, but some characters created signature moves based on their unique equipment, mixed with Hamon. Clacker Volley, Bubble Launcher, and Snake Muffler are examples. This is one thing that could have increased Haki's quality. Nearly every Haki user uses the power in the exact same way. There are barely any usages that are unique to individuals. The next necessary trait is obviously balance. I already talked about this extensively in another video, so I'll just summarize here. Every power should have pros and cons. The cons should either outweigh the pros or equal the pros. These next traits aren't necessary, but are still great. Checks is one that I don't see often. A check would be when one power acts as a counter to another. The best example would be the rock paper scissors factor of Chakra's elements. This adds in a layer of strategy to fights along with more balancing for powers. Magi sort of does this as well. Universal minor powers are also really cool. Chakra, Nen, and Hamon have these. Like checks, this adds another layer of creativity, because now the characters not only have to worry about the opponent's unique power, but also their knowledge of minor powers. Examples would be Sasuke catching and throwing a kunai with his foot, Gon paying attention to the way Genthu's aura flowed to predict if he was fainting or actually going to attack, Neji striking chakra points to shut down his opponent's chakra, and Joseph using oil conductivity of Hamon to escape the Hell Climb pillar. Universal power-ups are also really cool. Shikai, Bankai, Jin equips, Extreme Magic, Domain Expansion, Reverse Curse Technique, and Awakening are examples. These are higher powers that anyone that uses the system can achieve. Any Shinigami can get a Shikai, and if they have a Shikai, they can get the stronger form known as Bankai. In Magi, any dungeon capturer with a Jin can use a full Jin equip that comes with an Extreme Magic. Any sorcerer in JJK that has a curse technique can learn a reverse curse technique and use domain expansion based on that technique. Any devil fruit user that is Paramecia or Zoan can eventually awaken. These usually come with balancing issues, but are still pretty cool. They get the audience excited for characters to show off their power up, since there is always a strong possibility that they will eventually learn or use it. Fans can even start predicting what this power up is for each character. One downside would be holding the fans in suspense for too long, or not showing it at all. Examples would be Ishin, Ukitake, and Yoruichi from Bleach never using their Bankai. The next trait is having a creative source. I went into this in a video named Power Systems Based on Reality, but basically, power systems that have their roots in a unique and creative source are really cool. For example, Spin from JoJo Part 7 is a whole system based off the Golden Rectangle and Golden Spiral. An even greater example would be from the Raildex universe and its two main power systems. The Esper powers are scientific concepts turned into special abilities, and the magic powers are religious and mythological concepts turned into magical powers. Alchemy from FMA is also a creative source, though most of the rules were original to the story. The last trait is uniqueness. It's refreshing to see a unique power system once in a while. Most systems work like either mana in RPG, or just give everyone a power, which is individual at its most basic. Stance is one of the few unique power systems. Characters summon a ghost to fight in their place and use powers. The only similar systems I can think of stem from video games like Persona and Blue Dragon. Triggers from World Trigger are also very unique. The power system is made up of several weapons that you could choose from, each with their own unique ability. Everyone has access to the same triggers, and they have to make their own unique combinations of 8 triggers. I've never seen anything like this before. Bleach also introduced the idea of power systems being confined to weapons. I believe it was the first to have weapons be the source of special moves in anime, but it does have Kido on the side. Then Soul Eater and Magi took inspiration from that. Soul Eater system is all about a weapon and a maestro working together, while djinns in magi are centered around the user summoning the powers of the djinn through the weapon. A good measurement for whether a power system is good is creating original characters. If you create an OC under a power system, is it fun making your own powers? Does your creativity feel limited? Do you feel the need to make your characters a Mary Sue in order to compete with already existing characters? These are the traits that I think can make a good power system. The only necessary ones are special abilities and balance, while all the others are optional but pleasant. I no longer believe that power escalation is inherently a bad thing, and now believe that it all comes down to how it is executed. I'll split escalation into two types. Type 1 is improving what is already had. This refers to increasing the effectiveness of skills that a character already is capable of doing. Type 2 is approaching the ceiling. This refers to acquiring new powers and abilities. When I mention escalation, I am talking about individual power escalation, a character moving from their introductory skills and capabilities to an advanced one. A character displaying superhuman speed for the first time that they fight does not necessarily count as escalation, because we knew nothing about their speed beforehand. But a lot of these rules still applies to new characters that raise the power ceiling. The first thing that escalation needs to be is predictable. I'll use sports anime and manga as an example. In a sports manga, we have a certain expectation for types 1 and 2 based on real athletes. We roughly know the upper limits an athlete can reach in terms of speed and strength. We have an idea of how many techniques and strategies that they can learn, and we have an idea of how much they can improve one skill. We also have a general idea of the skill ceiling or game IQ for the different technical areas of the sport. We know the rules of the sport and how it's played, therefore we know almost every possible way a character can escalate for type 2 escalations. Good sports stories may push it a little, but not too much. For example, in Haikyuu, when Hinata in the final match is able to recover like a libero, set, serve, and more, it is predictable because we know the rules and how the sport is played. We are aware that all these actions can be performed by any player and that it just takes practice and time. When it comes to fantasy, there are more requirements. The first is that it should be foreshadowed. In fantasy, we apply what humans are capable of as the physical ceiling until shown otherwise. Fantasy stories need to set the skill ceiling for both types by showing off early examples. For type 1, physical abilities that are superhuman need to be foreshadowed. For example, if a character will eventually gain super speed, strength, or durability, another character should be shown doing this early on. We need a ceiling for how strong the character can get ahead of time. This ceiling can later be broken, but again, it should be before the target character reaches that point. However, how much a magical ability can be improved doesn't need to be foreshadowed in most cases, because the possibilities could be endless. Type 2 is mostly centered around skills and magical abilities. For magical capabilities that are applicable to multiple characters, another character should show it off before the escalating character reaches it. For hidden or unique abilities, they should be hinted at a good amount of time before their usage. For example, if a character in Naruto escalated by learning all 5 elements, it would be done well, because we have already seen characters like Kakashi and Hiruzen use multiple elements early on. Likewise, if a character in Bleach escalated by learning Shikai, Bankai, Kido, Ho-Ho, or Hakuda, it would be done well, because we have seen characters use each of these, and even some that use multiple. And if a character in Jujutsu Kaisen escalates by learning domain expansion, or becoming physically superhuman, it would be done well, because domain expansion is a universal technique shown by many pros, and characters like Yuji and Todo show superhuman physicality early on. Additionally, the Kyuubi and Sukuna living inside the respective protagonists is established as early as the first chapters, so their unique abilities that will become a form of power escalation have been foreshadowed. The next requirement, which is also necessary in a power system in general, is weaknesses. What makes a power system interesting is its weaknesses, drawbacks, and limitations. If a character's power has no weaknesses to be targeted, the character becomes broken and the author is forced to make something convoluted to stop them. Type 2 escalation doesn't require any drawbacks because there's usually a ceiling in place. For example, there are only 5 base elements, and for Shinigami, there is nothing higher than Bankai. For Type 1, escalation should preferably branch out rather than go straight up. For example, Rasengan escalates by getting stronger and bigger. This is a bad form of escalation and creates a problem that I'll discuss later. Chidori, on the other hand, branches out into different uses for various situations like Senbon, Stream, and Spear. Characters getting physically stronger, faster, and more durable, and attacks getting bigger and stronger are bad forms of power escalation. Earlier, I mentioned how physical ceilings for Type 1 need to be established because of our understanding of human capabilities. With magic, there is no understanding we have outside of the author's writing. A Rasengan can keep getting bigger and stronger and we can't really say, that doesn't make sense. When escalating straight up, there are usually no weaknesses. When Naruto has giant Rasengan, he has no reason to use a regular one. It might take more chakra, but the amount of chakra is controlled by the author and has never been shown to be an issue in the story. When branching out, there are inherent weaknesses to those branches. Phoenix Flower Jutsu has more shots and range than Fireball Jutsu, but it's not as big or strong. Chidori Stream has an area of effect damage, but it doesn't have the piercing power or precision as the regular Chidori. Type 1 shouldn't escalate straight up unless there are drawbacks that come with it. Kaioken is a great example. Goku's physical prowess and magical attacks escalate up, but at the cost of his physical health. This cost is usually shown and plays a role in his fights whenever the move is used. If Type 1 increasing upward is done like this, then it has a similar effect as branching out. Something is gained, but something is lost as well. One form isn't superior to the other. The last requirement is time. The amount of time it takes to acquire these abilities has to be spaced out and believable. This leads me into power-ups. When I say power-up, I am mostly referring to Type 2 magical abilities that are game changers, like a transformation or a new technique that greatly enhances the character's combat. A lot of this relates back to what I've said about power escalation. When planning a power-up, the author should introduce or hint at the power a while before it is used. It shouldn't be introduced late. The character should be shown training for it or receiving it ahead of time. The actual power-up does not need to be shown. The character with the power-up can also be implied to have gained this power through another character ahead of time, rather than shown training for it. I'll go over examples of good ones and bad ones. Naruto's Nine Tails chakra is a good one, as it is mentioned earlier. Kurama being sealed within Naruto is established in the first pages of chapter 1, and he uses it much later. The same goes for Bankai and Shikai in Bleach. Shikai is first shown by Renji before the Soul Society arc, and Bankai is stated to be achieved by most captains. Sasuke's Curse Seal is another good one. We see Sasuke get it from Orochimaru and he uses it later. Uryu's Ginrei Kojaku is also good. We knew he lost his powers after the Soul Society arc, and we see him training to regain them. While we didn't expect a different bow with new powers, we knew that he had gained some kind of powers, which is good enough. Renji's second Bankai and Ichigo's final Shikai and Bankai are also good power-ups. We are told early on in the final arc that the two aren't using their true powers. We also see them train for their powers, and the actual power isn't revealed until later. Finally, Haki in One Piece is a good power-up. We see quite a few characters use it ahead of time. We see the main characters train during time skip, and after the time skip, they can use it. For bad examples, the Enies Lobby power-ups aren't done well. While they are cool, we never see the characters train for them, and it is never hinted ahead of time that they had these powers. Additionally, I'm not even sure when they would have had the time to gain these powers. Naruto's Caped Chakra form is also a bad power-up. Naruto gains this power out of nowhere. There is no foreshadowing or training. Chad's left arm is another power-up done poorly, because like the rest, it isn't received or trained for ahead of time. It just suddenly appears. Finally, Ichigo's Mugetsu is a power-up poorly done. While it is explained and we do see him train for it, there is not enough time between its setup and its usage. It feels like the author just came up with it at the last second. In conclusion, power escalation is done well when it is predictable, foreshadowed, has risks and rewards, and is given enough time to happen. The risk can outweigh the reward, but the reward should not outweigh the risk. Power-ups are done well when they are set up through hinting, mentioning, or showing the power-up gained or trained for a good amount of time before it is used. Why does power escalation exist? In a story, as the plot moves forward, the stakes are expected to increase. This makes sense. If our main character is facing challenges that are on the same level or easier than the last, we as an audience have no reason to fear if he will succeed or not. A good writer usually wants to have their audience question whether the main character will succeed or fail. This creates suspense or tension and has us wanting to know what happens next. Even though I personally am always about 90% sure that the MC will be victorious, there's still that 10% chance that he might fail, and that keeps me engaged. If I feel like he has no chance of losing, my interest dwindles. Now, the plot is failing to keep me interested. However, the themes and characters can keep me interested. But why would a writer intentionally handicap themselves like this? So if our MC goes through 3 tasks in their story, it is general practice to make each task more challenging than the last. If all 3 tasks are the same level of difficulty, or they decrease in difficulty, after I've seen him pass the first one, I no longer have that 10% chance in my mind. I know he will pass the rest. So with all of that said, it makes sense how this applies to battle manga. In the battle subgenre, conflict is usually solved through battles. The type of battle is usually fought out with martial arts or a power system. So following the increase in conflict and stakes, the antagonist will get increasingly stronger or more will be at stake. I completely understand why manga and anime continue to do this up until today, but a little bit of creativity can create less pressuring and problematic solutions. First, I want to tackle the antagonist. If my MC beats a level 3 villain, the next villain needs to be above level 3, otherwise I have no doubt that he can win. As I said in my video on balancing, there's nothing wrong with power escalation as long as it's managed correctly. But if you can get a little creative, you can tackle escalation differently. Instead of relying on levels, you can rely on puzzles. I'll call this the puzzle method. In the most basic form, this can be found in rurouni Kenshin. Several villains have a puzzle that Kenshin has to solve in order to win the battle. With this method, the villains don't need to get stronger because the puzzles aren't linear. A world-ending threat is objectively greater than a city-ending threat, but a fighter with short weapons is not objectively greater than a fighter with illusionary striped arms. This method works best when all fighters are around the same power level, and the puzzle is what drives the fight. The most complex version of this is stand battles from JoJo. The best example would be the fight against the Darby brothers. They posed challenges that were completely puzzle-based and had no combat or strength. The fights had to be won primarily with intelligence. There are several fights that are in between Kenshin and JoJo. Most good power systems have a mix of combat and puzzle solving. The escalation of stakes can still be applied to the puzzle method. Each puzzle can get increasingly difficult. That way battles don't require the characters to get physically stronger. Instead, the characters have to think harder. The escalation of the puzzle can also be combined with the escalation of power, but regardless of the approach, I can't think of an example where the puzzle method would have negative effects on the story. Now I want to look at consequences and stakes. If our MC saves a city and then a country, why would I have any doubt whether or not he could save a single person? Additionally, the consequences of one person dying isn't as high as a city or a country at risk. In most cases, I wouldn't care, but there is still a way for me to be invested in this downgrade of stakes, and that is if they are personal. If this single person is the MC's brother that we've known since the start of the story, assuming the story is well written, I could care about this conflict more than the city or the country conflict. And because this conflict is so personal to the MC, there's a good chance that he will be more emotionally invested into the battle than the past ones, which will then usually spread to me. In this personal method, the villain doesn't need to be stronger than the MC, they just need to have the potential to harm the MC's brother. Because even if the MC defeats the villain, if the brother is still killed, it will be ultimately a loss for him. So in the city conflict, our question is whether the MC can beat the city-ending villain. But in the personal conflict, we know that the MC can beat the villain, so our question is whether he can save his brother's life. A great example of this is at the end of Parasyte. Spoiler alert. After Shinichi had already defeated the strongest Parasyte, there was one more battle. Murano, Shinichi's love interest, is captured by a death row criminal who is threatening to kill her. While Shinichi doesn't have Migi, he's still superhuman, so we know he can win. But we are invested because we are worried whether Murano will survive or not. Making stakes more personal can be as strong as or even stronger than making the stakes bigger. Stories can juggle these types of stakes instead of relying on conflict being bigger and badder. A writer can switch between these types or even mix them. I also understand why the puzzle method and personal method are not used as frequently. It's about ease. It's a lot easier to make my next antagonist physically superior than the last and have the MC train hard or get a power up in order to defeat him. But if I keep repeating this cycle, the balancing will break and things will get out of hand. The plot will be negatively affected because of this. If I keep making my opponent stronger, the MC will become too strong, and the only way for me to give him a challenging opponent is by introducing an even stronger opponent. There's no turning back. However, if I strictly use the puzzle method, the worst that can happen is I create a puzzle that is too complicated for the audience to understand, creating an unsatisfactory fight. But at least I have room to recover. I can always just make the next opponent have a more solvable puzzle, because as I said before, there aren't always levels to puzzles. They aren't always linear. Solving puzzle A doesn't automatically mean you can now solve puzzle B. As for stakes, it's easier for me to keep increasing the scale of what's at stake. I can just go from one person to more people to even more people. The downsides of this are big though. I have to keep creating larger and larger threats that have the power to destroy more. And once I take the next step, I can't go back by only using this strategy. However, if I use the personal method, the worst that can happen is that I jam in a new character that is apparently more personal to the MC than the last. But I personally find this mistake very easy to avoid. A little bit of planning will keep you far away from this point. and like the puzzle method, the negative effects on the plot are very contained. After I introduce this forced character, I can make the next conflict around an even more personal character that has been around for enough time. In conclusion, escalation is kind of necessary, but getting creative with writing and using things like the puzzle method and personal method can solve a lot of battle manga escalation problems.
Power systems are a very interesting part of anime. While making one from scratch takes a lot of creativity, making a power system that stems from real-life concepts might take even more work, and when it works, the payoff is much greater than one created from scratch. Avatar, A Certain Magical Index, FMA, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure all have these types of power systems. Avatar's power system is bending. Bending is actually based on the mixture of two real-world concepts. One is the 4 Greek elements, and the other is real-world martial arts. Each element is given a specific martial arts style to complement it. Airbending is based on Baguazhang. This fighting style complements the element of air through its movements. Baguazhang has evasive and smooth maneuvers that put focus on being untouchable, like air. Waterbending is based on Tai Chi. This martial arts style replicates the feeling of flowing water with its slow and elegant movements, making it a perfect match for its element. Earthbending is based on Hung Gar. With its heavily rooted stances, it imitates the image of a rock or a mountain, fitting its element. And finally, firebending is based on Northern Shaolin Kung Fu. This fighting style complements fire by being aggressive and explosive. Each element is manipulated through martial art movement and maneuvers. So by having the fighting styles match the elements, it allows for an interesting form of superpowered martial arts as a power system, and for a unique connection between the manipulation of elements and the element itself. A Certain Magical Index has 2 power systems, Esper powers, which are based on real and theoretical science, and magic, which is based on real-world religions. On the Esper side, every single ability is scientific and complex, originating from something called personal reality. This concept itself is filled with science. With the combination of quantum theory, uncertainty principle, Schrodinger's cat, and holism, Espers are able to create changes in the macroscopic world to create a microscopic effect, which is their powers. Each ability requires a lot of calculation in order to use. There are basic supernatural abilities such as electric manipulation and teleportation, but even those have their own unique nuances to them. For example, electricity manipulation has an ability based on the railgun. In real life, a railgun is based on 2 currents going the opposite direction with a projectile in between that acts as a bridge. The railgun technique in the anime and light novels is used by flicking a coin, but to activate it, all of the real-world concepts that make the railgun work are necessary, such as the currents I previously mentioned, positive and negative sides, Lorentz force, and Fleming's left-hand rule. This electric manipulation is also pushed to its scientific limits, with techniques such as manipulating and vibrating iron sand, controlling nerves and muscles, using static electricity to create wings and water vapor, and more. A simple ability such as teleportation requires calculation of the 11th dimension. The theory behind teleportation is to get away from the 3 dimensions, find their position in the 11th dimension, and then calculate the vectors to teleport. All of that just to teleport, a concept that seems so simple in normal fantasy or fiction. But then there are more creative abilities such as vector manipulation and particle waveform high-speed cannon. The first allows the user to redirect incoming attacks, fly by controlling the wind, move at superhuman speeds, and more. The second gives the user the ability to force an electron into the state of both a particle and a wave, which creates a beam of light. Magic, on the other hand, is based on ideological premises such as religions, belief systems, mythologies, or even folklore and fairy tales. While it does have tropey concepts such as mana, it is very unique and different, starting with its roots. Magic is explained through idol theory, which is the idea that objects or even events contain certain symbolic meanings and powers, and thus it is possible to draw on that power by imitating, altering, or magnifying said object or event. For example, I will use Divine Punishment and Execution of Light. Divine Punishment is a spell that removes the consciousness of anyone who bears ill will to the user. This spell is based on the logic that no one should bear any menace towards God. If so, punishment will apply. The idol theory in this spell is the metal piercings that the user has on their body, along with the hammer that they carry. The metal piercings symbolize the nails that pierced Jesus to the cross, and the hammer symbolizes the hammer that nailed them. This allows her to symbolically mimic Jesus on the cross, allowing her to substitute herself as God, and allowing the spell to work. Execution of light allows the user to change the precedence of things through verbally stating it, where something with a lower precedence can't harm something with a higher precedence. This allows the user to do things such as making their weapons invincible to an opponent by raising the precedence of their weapon's material and lowering the precedence of the skin. Idol theory comes into play with the user carrying flour, which represents the flesh of God. The power is based on the belief that the order of precedence was changed in order for Jesus to be killed on the cross, as humans shouldn't be able to kill him. This spell mimics Jesus changing the precedences. There are more concepts in magic like magic circles, chants, and songs, and special items, and multiple religions such as Christianity, Shintoism, and Buddhism are used. Next is Full Metal Alchemist. FMA's power system is basically where alchemy is real and can be used for fighting. While alchemy, the transformation of matter, turned out to be fake, FMA finds a way to make it as realistic as possible with a little bit of fantasy. Transmutation is the act of manipulating and altering matter by using natural energy. Transmutation is powered by the diastrophic energy that is released from the movement and collision of tectonic plates deep within the Earth's crust. Transmutation follows equivalent exchange. In order to obtain or create something of equal value must be lost or destroyed. So the sequence of transmutation is comprehension, destruction, and reconstruction. Knowing the periodic table by heart allows alchemists to know what the object they are breaking down is made of and what they can turn it into. After this, alchemists are able to quickly reform what they've broken down into something that follows the laws of conservation of mass and natural providence. All of this is possible through transmutation circles, which contains a circle that focuses and controls the flow of power, and alchemical runes that symbolize various things, which dictates what kind of alchemy that'll be used. And lastly, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. One of JoJo's power systems is the spin. The spin is a state of rotation defined by its closeness to perfection, that perfection being the golden spiral. The golden spiral is a mathematically endless spiral that is derived from the golden rectangle. The spin can only be used through paraphernalia such as steel balls or fingernails. To use this spin, users try to spin objects to follow as best they can the golden rectangle by applying a small force, creating a near-endless rotation that may create an infinite amount of rotational energy, and then throw said object at a target. The spin creates more rotational energy than it takes to create. The rotational energy is then transferred to other objects through vibrations. The spin can create various effects such as enhancing its projectile's destructive power, hardening the object it touches, and more. All of these power systems take researching a specific topic in order to create them, and it requires a lot of accuracy, precision, and creativity to pull off well. So when they are done successfully, it usually turns out to be a lot cooler than one created from scratch. Follow me on social media, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.
Chakra is one of the best power systems in anime and manga, but I want to use my unique view on power systems and balancing to go over its strengths and weaknesses. In early Naruto, especially part 1, Chakra was great. One of its strongest suits was how creative it was. There were several different categories of abilities: ninjutsu, taijutsu, genjutsu, clanjutsu, kekkei, summoning, etc. Genjutsu was underused for most of the story, but the rest were done pretty well and created a powerful foundation. With what I've mentioned so far, summonings were like a ninja's trump card. They could summon an animal of varying sizes that would add its own jutsu to the ninja's artillery, and it worked very well. The elemental rock paper scissors was also a creative form of balance. Each element was weak against one element and strong against another, although large quantities of elements can overpower an element that it is weak to. I wish this part of the system was used more often because of how much potential it had. I really liked the execution, or the way the story wrote these abilities. One really cool thing about how the system was written towards the beginning was that strategy could beat raw power. Examples would be Naruto and Sasuke versus Zabuza, Shikamaru versus Temari, and Shikamaru versus Toyuya. Having a more destructive jutsu did not guarantee victory, and great strategy could overcome it. Another thing I really liked was how a character could main one jutsu as long as it was versatile. My favorite examples of this are early Minato and Obito. Early Minato only used flying Raijin, yet he was already one of the most powerful ninja, going up against the future Raikage and the 8 Tails Jinchuriki with just that jutsu alone. Obito almost only used Kamui and was such a powerful threat. Both of these ninja combined their jutsu with taijutsu, but it also goes to show that not only was a destructive power not necessary to be strong, but one versatile jutsu was more than enough to be strong. A character didn't need to be like Hiruzen or Orochimaru and learn several jutsu. Another really great form of execution was the 6 Paths of Pain. The Rinnegan was a powerful jutsu with many jutsu under it, but instead of giving all of these powers to one character, the story cleverly split it up among 6 different characters, with each only being able to use one jutsu. This greatly balanced what could have been a broken antagonist, because each pain isn't that difficult to take on in a 1v1. Half of the paths are only powerful when working together. The only ones that are truly dangerous alone are Deva, Animal, and Ashura, but even then, they aren't broken, because as stated before, they have only one ability. The last positive I want to talk about is Escalation. Up until around the Pain arc, the Escalation was great. The Sasuke recovery arc is one of my favorite examples. Most of the members learn advanced techniques, but there is a clear drawback to them. Kiba learns a double-headed wolf, but he can't see while using it. Choji has the 3 pills, but they take up a lot of calories and almost kill him. Both of these also use up a lot of chakra. Sasuke had the curse mark, but it slowly allowed Orochimaru to take over his body. Naruto had the 9 tails, but it almost always caused troubles for his allies when he used it. Sage mode is the greatest power-up in Naruto. It boosted the user's basic jutsu, but it also had prices to pay. The user needed to be completely still while charging up natural energy, and the mode could only be held for a limited amount of time. While chakra never got completely ruined, there were individual powers used by powerful characters that began to sully its quality. The first issue I have is minor, but that would be how Kekkei was demoted from a unique clan jutsu to mixing 2 elements together. That just made no sense, but I'll move on to more important issues. Susanoo was terrible. It was a near invincible jutsu that had virtually no weaknesses. As a jutsu, it made no sense. It is an avatar made out of chakra? How does one construct it and why is it so unbreakable? How much chakra does it take? Because I don't think I've ever seen a ninja run out of chakra from using it too much. Whenever Itachi or Sasuke's Susanoo faded, they were already draining their chakra with other jutsu beforehand. This started the concept of bigger is better for jutsu down the line. It is basically a summoning, except all of its capabilities stem directly from you, and it takes no damage. Summonings were balanced because you were basically getting outside help. This isn't the case for Susanoo. Summonings could also be injured and retreated after taking huge damage. Again, this is not the case for Susanoo. It's what I'll be calling a non-summoning. Furthermore, Susanoo's combat was uninteresting. The user stood in place while the avatar swung or fired his weapons. With summoning, the summoner could fight alongside their summoning. This jutsu is such an issue because of how many major players in the story use it: Sasuke, Itachi, and Madara. And sadly, most of Madara's fighting was made up of this horrible jutsu. The next issue is the Jinchuriki. Up until the Pain arc, Naruto's use of the tailed beast was fine. Not only did the story try to limit how much he used it, but as I said before, it would often cause harm and be as problematic as it was helpful. Cost and reward. However, B was the catalyst of this problem because he eliminated the cost. He was friends with his beast and suffered no consequences from using its power. Naruto had a lot of chakra, but had to worry about Kurama taking over. B has a lot of chakra and can use Kyuki's powers however he likes, even turning into him on command. This is extremely unbalanced, which leads me to Kurama Chakra mode. I absolutely despise this mode. Not only is the form such an asspull, but like B, it gets rid of all Jinchuriki costs and only leaves the benefits, making it unbalanced. Even worse, Naruto's moveset becomes extremely lazy here. The first issue is the chakra arms. Since he can extend them and make so many, he can just stand in one place as the arms do everything. This is such a downgrade from his previous fighting style. The next problem is how he only uses Rasengan. He has so many unnecessary variations of Rasengan, and when you combine that with the chakra arms, you have a character who basically has long-ranged Rasengans and can make multiple at a time. Rasengan had the drawback of creating only one at a time or 2 in Sage mode. This is eliminated here. While I said it was cool for a character to have one versatile jutsu, Rasengan is not versatile. It is just an attack, and KCM Naruto doesn't use it very creatively, he simply attacks with it. Versatile would be Shadow Clone Jutsu or Transformation, but I digress. This form takes away from the diversity in Naruto's moveset and replaces it with something unbalanced, uncreative, and visually unappealing. In Naruto's fight against Pain, he had to manage his chakra, but with this form, he can just dump any amount of chakra into any attack. And lastly, KCM gives Naruto a non-summoning to match Sasuke's. Why can Kurama turn into a chakra avatar, but no other beast can? Who knows? My next problem is Hashirama's moveset. When he was summoned in part 1, his powers seemed reasonable, but then part 2 arrived. Hashirama was made to rival Madara, so when Madara's powers started becoming stupid and unbalanced like Susanoo, so did Hashirama's. Since Madara had a non-summoning in the form of Susanoo, Kishimoto decided that Hashirama needed one too, which was the Wood Golem. Again, it has the same issues as Susanoo, except it isn't invincible. When Madara could cover the Kyuubi and Susanoo armor, Hashirama just had to have his parallel, so he was given Sage mode and another non-summoning. Why does Hashirama have Sage mode? What type of Sage mode is it? Why does he have non-summons? Who knows? Next is the 10 tails Jinchuriki form. First off, flight is extremely lazy. Not only does it have no costs or limits, not even chakra consumption, but it also makes fights less interesting. The second is the True Seeker orbs. These were incredibly lazy. They are orbs that can turn into almost anything, even a bomb. They have no noticeable costs or limits. The least the story could have done is give them a cooldown or have them run out, but no. The third and final issue is the fact that only Senjutsu and Taijutsu works on them. This advantage comes with no costs and no logical reason. Just another excuse to make the Jinchuriki more broken. My next problem is Late Minato. Earlier I complimented him for being so powerful with only one jutsu. Late Minato says screw that. This man is given the 9 tails, KCM, and Sage mode. Honestly, my problem isn't when did he get these, but the fact that the story thought that Minato couldn't fight like Obito with Kamui and decided to give him unnecessary and some broken power-ups. It feels like Chakra continued saying bigger is better. My last problem is Kaguya. She was broken with no limits. She had no hints at chakra consumption. Nearly none of her jutsus had built-in weaknesses, and she had the most broken jutsu in the story. All of these problems are solidified when she required a kryptonite to be defeated. A rare MacGuffin needed to be written into the story in order to defeat her. That is what I call a kryptonite, and it is a sign of bad writing. It means that the writer didn't properly balance a character, and this is a last-ditch effort to find a way to defeat them. Kaguya's kryptonite was the seals on Naruto and Sasuke's palms. Even worse, she wasn't defeated, just sealed. In conclusion, Chakra started off very well, and was doing mostly great until after the pain arc. Most of Chakra's problems stem from a lack of balancing that the system used to have. Jutsu are given strengths without a worthy cost or weakness, and this creates problems in the fights and makes them less engaging and more poorly written. Nen is one of the greatest power systems, but I want to use my unique view on power systems to analyze it. Since Nen has a clear skill tree, I will start at the roots and make my way up. First, the basics. I mean the 4 principles and the advanced techniques. I've mentioned this before, but I think it is sort of a drawback. These basic moves are learnable for any Nen user. This becomes a problem because moves as simple as these could be characters' unique Hatsu, but instead are made available for everyone. I think this not only eliminates potential Hatsu, but also potential battle situations. First, potential Hatsu. Ko and Ryu are the best examples. These 2 advanced techniques are basically the same as most enhancers' Hatsu, so what's the point of being an enhancer when you can learn these moves and get mostly the same effect? Gon and Invokin's Hatsu are basically stronger versions of this, giving them little versatility over someone who can use Ko, Ryu, and their own Hatsu. Next is potential battle situations. The potential for one fighter to have an invisible Hatsu against someone who can't see it is eliminated because all fighters can learn to cloak with In and see with Gyo. This is just one example, but to be fair, it does open up some doors too. A good example will be Kurapika vs Uvogin and his use of In. But since this type of strategy has rarely been used so far, these universal abilities close more doors than they open. Another minor issue is the concept of mana points or MP. Up until Knuckle explained all of these concepts, I wasn't too sure if Nen worked like Hamon, where you can create an unlimited amount, or if it worked like MP, where you had a certain amount and drained it with each use of Nen. It may have just been me, but I think the issue is attributed to the fact that the characters rarely, if ever, speak about or are shown running out of Nen when fighting. Next up are aura types. The concept is very creative, but not all parts hold up. The weakest link is Enhancer. I don't think I've seen a single creative ability from this type. All of them basically do the same thing, but to varying degrees. I also think Specialization is kind of weak due to how vague it is. One cool thing about aura types was how you could explain in detail how each Hatsu worked. And that brings me to compatibility and mixed Hatsu. The concept of compatibility is amazing but sadly underused. It is the only thing that makes Gon's Hatsu interesting. The idea that a character can use multiple types and incorporate that into their attacks is really cool and adds versatility. Single type techniques have created cool abilities like Killua and Hisoka's, but mixed types are the best written. Castro's double technique is a great example. First he has to conjure a clone, then he has to use manipulation in order to control it. Morel's purple haze has him transmuting his aura into smoke, and then manipulating it into different forms. Knuckles' Hatsu emits a mascot that can manipulate his target's Nen. Shoot can conjure a bird cage and use manipulation to trap touched body parts inside of it. With just one type, techniques of the same category start to look the same, but when multiple types are involved, the process behind the move becomes so complex and intricate. There are a few reasons why I say it's underused. The first and most obvious is that not many characters have multiple types, much less techniques with multiple types. Even our 2 main characters rarely use this. Killua only has transmutation, and Gon only used scissors and paper a few times. He has still yet to mix 2 or more types into one attack. The second reason I say it is underused is because of the amount of Hatsu that could classify as multi-typed but aren't. Razor's 14 Devils, Goreinu's Gorillas, Netero's Statue, and Killua's Godspeed are just a few examples of abilities that only have one type but should have at least two when you use the logic of how abilities are constructed in Hunter x Hunter. The third reason I say this is because the surface of its potential is only being scratched. The most types in one move has been 3, even though there are 5 available types for all users. Also, this ties back to why I think specialization is weak. You can't understand or predict how a Hatsu under this type would be created, which means that it also can't be used in multi-typed moves. Now for weaknesses. The first is, like Chakra, the balancing of certain techniques down the line. I've already gone into detail on those in separate videos, so I won't repeat myself, but I will throw Netero and Finks into the unbalanced category. My next problem is the amount of weakly written abilities. With all the creative foundations laid out, I'd expect most of the powers to be stand levels of creative. There are some really creative ones, but there are also some unbelievably lame ones. Nearly every enhancer attack is lame, but there are also lame attacks outside of this category. Silva's Hatsu allows him to basically shoot ki blasts, and Zeno can make a small dragon out of his aura. Razor can throw an aura ball, like a ki blast. In the case of Razor, he at least has another ability, but characters in Hunter x Hunter not only have a limited amount of moves, usually maxing around 3, but it takes thought to create even the simplest of moves, so for such lame abilities to be created is a hindrance. Stands have their fair share of lame abilities, but there are also significantly more creative abilities than not. Hunter x Hunter doesn't have that many Hatsu yet, so having powers like these take up space is a stain in my opinion. Other weak abilities include Ramots, Saraso, and Blasters. My last problem is Nen getting stronger after death. This would seem unproblematic, but it was clearly written in to be used. There have been 3 instances where it was used. The first is by Pito, but there are other worse problems going on at that moment, so the effects aren't as noticeable. The other 2 happen in the manga, and in both situations, a character benefits from the enhancement with virtually no costs. It has always functioned as a cheap and lazy power boost so far. In conclusion, Nen has a lot of creativity and untapped potential with its intricacies, but it also suffers from abilities lacking proper drawbacks and balance to them, along with some lame abilities. Devil Fruits is a power system I haven't really talked about. Like the rest of the series, I will use my unique view on balancing to analyze the power system. The first type of Devil Fruit is Paramecia. I personally split these into 2 categories, single power and multi-power fruits. I'll start with single power fruits. These offer the best powers that the story has. By the name, they obviously give the user one specific power. The concept of many of these is extremely creative. There are characters that can chop up their body, turn parts of their body into bombs, turn their body into blades, create wax, create strings, and many other unique abilities. Powers under this category tend to be unique even under the sphere of anime and manga. The story would use a bizarre concept as an ability and make it work. This was especially effective because in early One Piece, the story wasn't trying to create powerful opponents, so the creativity of the ability could be prioritized. And past the initial concept, Luffy's applications of his fruit are some of the most inventive stuff I've seen in stories. I'm obviously talking about his gears, mostly second and third since they don't involve Haki. Then there's multi-powered Paramecias. These are fruits that give the user multiple disconnected powers that fall under the same umbrella or motif. Examples would be Law and Sugar's fruits. Within Law's room, he can cut things apart, switch the positions of things, levitate objects, and more. With her fruit, Sugar can turn people into toys, erase memories, make contracts, and pause her own aging. These are the only 2 I remember so far, but I fear that there are more to come because of their potential. My problem is that it abuses Paramecia's lack of a definition and comes off as very lazy in comparison. Getting multiple abilities rather than one is an unfair advantage that comes at no price. Big Mom's fruit also borders on this multi-powered category, because while all of her abilities come back to manipulating souls, some of her applications are very loose in mechanics, like Prometheus or Zeus. Zoans are some of the most balanced fruits. They give the user the ability to transform halfway or completely into an animal, each with their own advantages. The trio from CP9 are the best examples of this. My issue with the fruit begins to arise with mythical Zoans. They give the characters beast transformations, along with extra powers, which feels like a deviation from the initial idea of Zoans and comes with no drawback. Like multi-powered Paramecia, this seems like a result of power escalation. The last type is Logia, and this is easily the most problematic. Most Logia have the ability to turn the user into the element, meaning that they can make themselves untouchable. This particular ability is obviously overpowered. The fact that the story felt the need to create a whole nother power system just to combat this shows how big of a problem it was. Unless a fighter can find the element's natural weakness, like against Crocodile or Enel, they have no way of harming them. And on top of that, they generate and manipulate a nearly unlimited amount of their element. Sea Stone and the sea is also a weakness, but it's a weakness to all fruit users. The last topic is Awakening. So far, only Zoans and Paramecia have shown this ability. I'm fine with Zoans because it gives them enhanced physical abilities, but seemingly reduces their intelligence as well. Paramecia users gain the power to turn their surroundings into their fruit substance and manipulate it. Not only is the logic questionable, but it's unbalanced. The character that could turn his body into mochi now has the ability to turn other inanimate objects into mochi and control them. It's eerily close to the way Lokias manipulate an element, and is an issue stemming from the improper handling of power escalation. I feel like Awakening in general takes away from the simplicity of the earlier devil fruits, and is another method to create more and more powerful abilities. In conclusion, devil fruits started off really well, but the story wasn't trying to create destructive and powerful abilities. But as the story continued, like most battle manga, the power system and characters faced power escalation, and the simplicity and balance of the early concept began to take a hit. The powers, especially Paramecia, are still as creative as they were, just no longer as simple or balanced. One Piece has a few power systems, and one of them is fighting styles. This system doesn't really have rules, but I want to take a look at the positives and negatives. Examples of fighting styles are Santoryu, Black Leg style, Rokushiki, and Fishman Karate. Fighting styles in One Piece are martial arts that usually come with enhanced and even supernatural abilities. Zoro's sword styles allows him to make super fast slashes and fire sword waves. Sanji's style gives him superhuman strength and speed with his feet. Rokushiki allows the CP9 to perform superhuman feats. Fishman Karate allows the users to manipulate water. Personally, they are as cool as or even cooler than devil fruits. The biggest positive of fighting styles is that it allows characters to become strong without the use of devil fruits. When you look at the Straw Hats, there are 4 devil fruit users and 4 powerful fighters. Out of the powerful fighters, only one of them is a devil fruit user. Zoro, Sanji, and the 10th member are all able to fight on Luffy's level with their fighting styles. The scarcity of devil fruits in early One Piece kept the world and fights more interesting. In modern One Piece, devil fruits and Haki cause a lot of power scaling issues, and sadly, nearly every powerful character has to be one of them. Fighting styles don't have this problem, and it would have been nice to see powerful characters use them more. The creativity of fighting styles are a blessing and a curse. The problem is that anything can happen, and if a power system allows anything to happen, the audience has no realm of expectation or predictability, and the author is allowed to make assballs. Rokushiki is probably the best written in terms of predictability. There are 6 specific powers, and they can be used in various ways, but the other 3 are a little more vague. Fishman Karate allows the user to manipulate water, but the way this can happen is unpredictable. 3-Sword style and Black Leg style are superhuman swordsman and superhuman kicker respectively. For Zoro, basically as long as he's using a sword, it can fit into his style. He can fire air pressure as a projectile with Takanami or Pound Ho. He can create illusionary extra body parts and swords with 9-Sword style, a derivative of his main style. After time skip, he can create a tornado with Tatsumaki. He can cut flames with Kitsunebi Ryu. This is Zoro using Kinemon's sword style, which was shown to cut flames before, but how and when he learned this ability is left unexplained. For Sanji, as long as he's kicking, it can fit into his style. In pre-time skip, the only things he really had that were unpredictable were his strength, speed, and Diable Jambe. But after time skip, he can walk on air and water with Skywalk and Blue Walk, and surround himself with flames with Hell Memories. While this isn't technically a fighting style, some of Luffy's moves post-time skip follow this random logic. Red Hawk and Thor Elephant Gun allow Luffy to use fire and electricity in his punches respectively. The first issue that stems from this is the effect that it has on fights. This problem is more than just fighting styles and actually includes the issue with having a fight without a solid power system. The effect is a lack of predictability. As mentioned before, in Whiskey Peak, Zoro is in a fight and he suddenly fires a gust of wind with his sword, with Takanami, to defeat some opponents. Later in Skypiea, after hints from Zoro's inner monologue, he fires a sword wave with Pound Ho. We didn't know that he could do this before, based on his moves, and there was no way for us to assume that this was possible, so this is an ass-pull. Pound Ho was at least hinted at with Takanami before the fight started, but the same goes for Diable Jambe against Jabra and 9-Sword style against Kaku. Those were both problems based on techniques. For problems based on battle mechanics, I'll go to the Das Bones and Lucci fights. In a good fight with a good power system, the fight will usually be won by the victor taking advantage of his opponent's weaknesses. In Zoro's fight against Dad's Bones, Zoro's Santoryu doesn't allow him to cut through steel, but he wins the fight by learning to cut through steel. It's a cool scene, but it's bad writing that is enabled by the loose power system of the fighting styles. As long as it involves a sword, Zoro can do it, but what's worse in this example is that we don't have a good explanation for the difference before and after. The explanation for how he cut steel was mostly mental. In Lucci's fight, Luffy is the victor, but because Rokushiki doesn't really have exposable weaknesses, Luffy simply wins the fight by having more endurance, which is unsatisfying. There were no hints prior to or during the fight that Lucci had lower stamina and durability. Throughout the fight, Luffy's strategy is simply to attack with his strongest moves. Both seem to be even until the end, where Luffy is hit by Lucci's strongest attack 3 separate times, but he just gets up after seconds and keeps fighting, which eventually gives him the win. This extra example is a little smaller but ties back to our lack of understanding of character capabilities. Before encountering Kuma, Sanji could kick through almost anything, but once Oda wants to show off a character's strength, he gets hurt from kicking Kuma, which I believe has never happened before. It is similar to Zoro's steel cutting. His superhuman traits were never given a limit until he met Dad's Bones. Because of the vagueness, the author can modify a character's limitations to their convenience. The second issue that stems from this is the logic and power development for the fighting styles and attacks. I'm not even going to ask why characters can do what they can do, but rather why they can't go further. If the body part in Nine Sword style is illusionary, then what's the point of the Ashura mode or showing the extra part? If Zoro's spirit can create illusionary body parts, what more can it do? Can he make more than 9 swords? If not, then why? If he can create tornadoes with Tatsumaki, what else can he create with his swords? And for his battle decisions, why doesn't he rely on long-ranged attacks more often? For Sanji, if he's strong enough to kick the air to fly, why can't he kick out shockwaves like the CP9 or Zoro's Pound Ho? If Sanji can ignite his foot, can he ignite other body parts? And how much control over the flames does he have? Same goes for Hell Memories. If Luffy can randomly use fire and electricity, what other elements can he use, or why can't he use them? In a regular power system, these questions would usually have answers. In this case, the answers to these questions could greatly alter the fighter's combat styles, but because there isn't enough planning gone into the fighting styles, characters can do random things but not take them to their logical limits. They'll simply stop whenever it's convenient for the author. In conclusion, fighting styles are very creative, but their looseness creates many holes like predictability, proper limits, satisfying conclusions to fights, logical power development, and battle tactics. Haki is terrible and might be one of the worst power systems ever written. In this video, I'll explain why. I'll start with Armament Haki. This is the most used and the most problematic version. The basic techniques are enhancement, hardening, and imbuement. All of the moves are basically the user increasing their power level. Luffy hardening his arm increases his arm's power level, and Zoro imbuing his swords is him increasing his sword's power level. Enhancement Haki also allows people to hit Logia users, but I'll dive into that later. Power levels are terrible for any power system. I've explained it in my power escalation video, so watch that for more context. This Haki is especially disappointing for One Piece because before this, there was nothing close to power levels. Characters could fight with creativity or strategy. Armament Haki destroys that. Before, when One Piece had powerful characters, they would have to give them a good devil fruit or fighting style. Now all they need is Haki, which is almost as lazy as DBZ power levels. Whoever has a stronger Haki wins, no need for creativity. Let me display how lazy Haki is by adding it to previous or potential fights. In Luffy vs Crocodile, instead of using his blood to dampen and punch the sand, he would have just used Haki. And in this case, he wouldn't have lost twice already, and in the second fight, he wouldn't have even come up with the strategy of spitting water to wet the sand and soak himself. In Luffy vs Enel, Luffy wouldn't have even needed the hard counter of rubber against lightning. He would just use Haki. In Luffy vs Lucci, he wouldn't need Gear 3rd. He'd just use a level of Haki that is powerful enough to shatter Lucci's Tekai. In Zoro vs Dad's Bones, he wouldn't have needed to learn how to cut steel, because with Haki, he'd already be capable of doing that. Even though I criticized those last 2 fights in my fighting style analysis, what they had is significantly better. And for a theoretical fight, Zoro vs Sanji or Luffy would have been interesting, because the latter would have to find a creative way to avoid getting cut, since they have no metal to defend themselves against Zoro's blades. Sanji would have the additional problem of his legs having a shorter range than Zoro's swords. With Haki, this problem is eliminated with a lazy solution. Sanji might still have to worry about range, but with hardening, getting hit isn't that big of a problem anymore. Haki also has advanced techniques like emission and internal destruction. While I stopped reading the Wano arc before this was introduced, I can still tell you that it is stupid. These are more lazy and universal power-ups that avoid coming up with creative solutions. It also allows the story to create lazy powers for villains. Kaido is allowed to be nearly invincible because a strong enough Haki can damage him. Same goes for the 3 admirals and their Logia powers. Crocodile and Enel had a counter written into their fights, but these 3 were overpowered without a weakness because Haki can deal with it now. Without Haki, none of these lazy and foolish decisions would have been made. Furthermore, the limits of Haki are very non-existent. The only time I remember a character getting tired from using Haki is Luffy when he used Gear 4th. But then again, even Gear 2nd and 3rd exhausted Luffy before Haki existed, so this isn't much of a drawback for Haki. Observation Haki is the second form of Haki. Basic techniques allow sensing presence, strength, emotion, and intent. The power system wants to be like DBZ so badly. I'll tackle these one by one. Presence sensing removes a fighter's strategy to hide during battle. Strength sensing is basically confirming that power levels exist, which is lazy. Emotion sensing is an extra cheap ability that is unnecessary. It can allow a character to cheat in a conversation that would otherwise create interesting complexities. But if the liar has an even better observation Haki, they can hide their emotions. Once again, power levels. Intent also makes fights lazier, because fighters can now accurately predict the future, unless of course the opponent has a higher power level. An advanced version of this technique is Future Vision, which is nearly broken. The ability at least has its limits, like only being able to see a short distance into the future, or the fact that what they saw can change, or that the user needs to focus. But it is still a broken ability, and ruined Luffy vs Katakuri. Instead of Luffy coming up with a creative counter to Katakuri's Mochi and Future Vision, he has to learn Future Vision mid-battle in order to win. Once again, power levels outweigh strategy. Additionally, all of the techniques from Armament and Observation Haki could have been unique moves for characters, but instead are given to everyone, which then limit the possibilities of battle, similar to the basics of Nen. The last one is Conqueror's Haki. This can't be learned through training and is only given to specific people with the qualities of a king. This is stupid. I can understand strong genetic powers or signature powers, but the strongest powers being given to those who have king-like qualities is personally too much. Basic techniques are Domination, Incapacitation, and Pressure. Domination is a weaker version of Incapacitation that doesn't knock out the opponent. Incapacitation is basically a fighter saying, my power level is far greater than yours, which knocks out anyone with a low power level around them. This is so lazy. Instead of actually working to take down the small fry, characters can just now knock them out with their high power level. I believe even DBZ didn't have something this stupid. Pressure is when such a powerful Conqueror's Haki is used that it has destructive effects on inanimate objects. Once again, this is stupid. An advanced version of this technique is Infusion. This is basically a stronger armament Haki that also allows attacks to hit without making contact. I don't know the limitations of this move because I didn't read that far, but I'm going to guess that there are none or very minimal. In conclusion, Haki might be one of the worst power systems because it turns a story with fights that use creativity into one with fights that rely heavily on power levels, and it eliminates battle possibilities that existed before its introduction. Breathing styles from Kimetsu no Yaiba is a unique power system. Unlike most power systems, it is essentially all physical and swordsmanship. By using total concentration breathing, characters are able to enhance their physical abilities. Each breathing style has swordsmanship based on a motif, usually an element, like fire or water. Flame breathing focuses on single powerful strikes, while water breathing focuses on fluid motions. Each style has numbered forms, which are different attacks. Whether the elemental special effects are real or symbolic is debatable, because the author says one thing, but the manga has proof contradicting that, but that won't affect my analysis. I'll start with the pros. The biggest one is that the fights go by faster. With a traditional power system, the more complex it is, the more the author wants to show off those complexities. And when there are multiple characters fighting at once, it becomes even more complicated. Great examples are the Grateful Dead and Beach Boy fight, or the White Album fight, both from JoJo Part 5. They're really cool, but the abilities are so detailed, which means that it takes time to properly show off what they can do. Kimetsu can juggle several characters fighting at the same time effortlessly, because all they're really doing is swordsmanship. Each style may have different special effects and forms, but at the end of the day, they're swinging swords. This makes fights easier to write and last a lot shorter than average battle manga fights. But this doesn't mean that fights are less entertaining. This is because the breathing causes stress on the characters, so they have to fight with blood and sweat to end their battles as quickly as possible. The use of phases in battles can also ensure that the battle is entertaining regardless of its length. The next pro is that creating new styles is simple. All the author has to do is create a new motif and make a few forms that line up with the motif. Most styles haven't even shown off all their forms. The next pro is that the styles are recyclable. Each character isn't required to have their own unique style. Multiple characters can use the same style, and it makes sense in context. It's a martial art that is passed down. Being able to recycle means that the author's creativity will never have to be drained. They can choose whether or not they want to make a new style. The last pro is that it looks really cool. Elements and swordsmanship are already cool alone, so making a power system by combining the two makes both exponentially better. If I randomly saw a picture of Tanjiro swinging a sword with columns of water flowing around him, I'd immediately start doing research to figure out what anime it was from and what the power system was like. Now the cons. The first is that there isn't much creativity or strategy that comes from the styles. Every attack is a sword attack, and unless the author goes into microscopic detail about the strength and weaknesses of the style and treats it like a real martial arts style, there isn't much strategy that can be extracted, and the author does not do this. Because of this, like early Bleach, the fights tend to rely on the creativity of the opponent's powers to differentiate the fights. Imagine a fight between two demon slayers. Now imagine another one. They probably look the same, don't they? One way the system could have countered this leads into my next con. A lot of the attacks in the styles are interchangeable, which leads me to ask why some of them even needed to be forms. In just the water style, the 1st, 2nd, 5th, 7th, and 8th forms are all just a single sword attack. Then there are unique forms with unique qualities, like Water's 6th and 11th, Thunder's 1st, Beast's 9th, 10th, and 11th, and Tanjiro has added more variety by mixing and modifying forms. But the majority of forms are still single sword strikes, or a barrage of sword strikes. If each form had a clear and useful purpose that came with pros and cons, then both of these flaws could be minimized or countered. The last con is that the styles tend to bleed together, which is a result of the two other cons I mentioned, especially the second. The power system also had a lot of untapped potential. The first one is the use of different weapons. The Sound, Love, and Stone Hashiras have unique weapons that play into their styles, but they are the only users of their style. I think that it would be cool to see Slayers use these styles with normal katanas and use the other styles with unique weapons. The difference in approaches to the styles and forms could create more variety. The second piece of untapped potential is the use of multiple styles. The way Tanjiro switched from Sun for power to Water for stamina reminded me of how Vegeta used Super Saiyan God and Blue in the manga. Each style has a focus that goes with the theme, so if more characters had multiple, they could switch between them based on their situation, creating more strategy. But sadly, Tanjiro is the only one with two breathing styles. In conclusion, the pros of breathing styles is that they're easier to write, create, and are recyclable. The cons are that the styles blend together, have little strategy, and a lot of the forms are interchangeable. The untapped potential was in using unique weapons and learning multiple styles.
Triggers from World Trigger are easily the greatest power system in all of anime and manga. In this video, I will be discussing how it achieves that status. Trigger's biggest rivals are Nen from Hunter x Hunter, Stans from JoJo's, and Alchemy from Fullmetal Alchemist. The first thing that makes Triggers better than most power systems is the fact that it puts the power system before the characters. For example, anime like Naruto, Bleach, One Piece, and Fairy Tail focus on giving each character a unique power that represents them. The powers are made for the characters, but for Triggers, the power system was clearly created first and the characters second. The characters in World Trigger use what's given to them rather than creating something unique to them. Alchemy from FMA also does this, which is why it is also considered an amazing power system. Next is balance. Every trigger has some kind of weakness or counter. There is no trigger that is superior to the rest. A great example of this are the three primary attack triggers: Kogetsu, Scorpion, and Ray Gust. Kogetsu has high power and durability, but it has no gimmicks and is heavy. Scorpion is almost weightless, can take on any shape, and can come from any part of the body, but it has low durability. Ray Gust can slightly change shapes, turn into a shield, and has high durability, but it is very heavy and has low offensive power. All three of these weapons offer some kind of benefit and cost. In JoJo and Hunter x Hunter, not all abilities are balanced. JoJo has stands like the World, Made in Heaven, and BIG, while Hunter x Hunter has powers like Skill Hunter and Double Phase. Next is the power of an individual character. There are no characters who are invincible in World Trigger. Some may be extremely good, but all of them can lose and have lost. The winners of the battles are determined mostly by tactics, and some by combat skill. With the right plan, even the strongest fighters can be taken down. No character is broken, unlike in Hunter x Hunter, where Meruem is basically invincible for no good reason. Next is creativity. There are so many triggers in World Trigger, and even more are being made as the story progresses. Characters can create unique fighting styles by using a specific combination of triggers. They can also create new attacks by mixing triggers together or using them in a new way. To add on to creativity, there is customization. B-rank agents are allowed to modify already existing triggers to slightly alter their functions. For example, adding a Suba to a Kogetsu. A-ranks have greater freedom in customization and can add in functions to their triggers. For example, having a spear-shaped Kogetsu or a double-bladed scorpion. This is one of FMA's biggest weaknesses. Alchemy's limits are so restraining that characters are forced to use the same attacks over and over again. If FMA was battle-focused and Ed fought 10 different battles, this weakness would have been made much more apparent. And lastly, the rule of cool. This is something that most power systems struggle with. Power systems like Naruto's, Bleach's, and Fairy Tail's have a lot of cool in them, but they are usually sacrificed for consistency. On the other hand, FMA is consistent, but it sacrifices being cool to get that consistency. World Trigger accomplishes this with black triggers and Tamakomo triggers. Black triggers are basically their own separate power system that focus entirely on being epic. Yuma's trigger and Jin's Fujin are overpowered, but since they are black triggers, they are only used in special situations and are not allowed in the tournaments, where most of the fights in World Trigger take place. Tamakomo triggers are unique triggers that only the agents of Tamakomo first have. These are basically the same as black triggers in their usage and purpose. They are cool and overpowered and have only been used against neighbors in emergencies. This brings the much needed aspect of cool into a shonen power system. Nen's first issue is the multiple base powers. All of the Ten, Zetsu, Ren, Hyo, Shu, and so on gives all of the characters the same abilities, while each character can create a Hatsu. This creates a similar problem to Haki in One Piece. Characters' fighting styles are no longer restricted to their unique ability because of the base powers. By allowing everyone to enhance, suppress, conceal, fortify, or unfold their aura, a lot of battle factors and possibilities are being taken away. With triggers, the only thing that everyone has is bailout, radar, and try on body. While almost all triggers are available to everyone, each agent can only use a maximum of 8. The second issue is allowing characters like Meruem and Chrollo to exist. Their abilities are unjustly overpowered. The third issue is limits. Characters can gain an enormous boost in power by simply sacrificing something. While there is an attempt to balance it out with a cost and benefit, it's still nonsense to think that by simply sacrificing his life, Gon was able to completely close the power gap between him and Pito in a second, even becoming stronger than Pito. World Trigger doesn't have any bullshit like this. The weakness of stance is that they are stagnant and lack any cool shonen tropes and power systems. There are no power-ups, no signature techniques, no training, and there are rarely ever any straightforward brawls. Initially this seems like a great thing, but just like in FMA, as the story continues to go on, you start to notice that the lack of these things starts to make the fights and the power system feel a little stale. Power-up signature techniques and trainings are simply undeniably cool, even when it breaks consistency. I enjoy tactical fights that don't focus on attacks, but when almost every fight becomes like this, it starts to get a little boring. Sometimes I just want to watch two people throw hands. JoJo does have fights like these, like Giorno vs Bucciarati, but these are very rare. Alchemy's weakness is the restrictions, which are also what makes it special. While it's cool that alchemy is so specific, its flaws become noticeable when you realize that Ed always does the same thing in every fight. He either turns his arm into a blade, creates a weapon from his surroundings, or manipulates his surrounding to attack. While alchemy can vary from character to character, those characters can also only repeat the same attacks. Mustang always burns something, and Kibli always explodes something. I think this weakness could have been countered by not restricting each character to one type of alchemy. In conclusion, triggers remain as the #1 power system in all of anime and manga by being cool, consistent, balanced, and creative.
After watching some of the anime and manga that I talked about, and developing stronger arguments, I decided to make a follow-up to my greatest power system video to enhance my points. I recommend that you watch that one first, because I will try not to repeat the points. Also, I made a video talking about power escalation, and it had the important explanation of balance in powers. To get a clearer understanding of what I mean by balance, see that video. Starting with the rule of cool, a power system should be cool. Battle manga prioritize fights, and if those fights aren't entertaining, then the manga is doing something wrong. Coolness definitely assists in making the power system and the fights using it good. Tamakoma and black triggers are actually not overpowered. My definition of overpowered means that they are unbalanced and that the pros heavily outweigh the cons. World Trigger establishes that triggers that are created for a specific user are stronger than those that are created to be universal. Regular border triggers give the user a Treon body with 8 trigger slots. When using a black trigger, it creates its own Treon body, which means that the border body can't be used at the same time, meaning that they can only use one ability, while the border body can use up to 8. The 2 Tamakoma triggers with a noticeable power boost consume a lot of Treon, and have been shown that the users can only keep it up for a limited amount of time. The third one doesn't actually perform better than regular triggers, so it's balanced. Additionally, they gain the benefit of specializing towards the user, but lose the benefit of being able to be used by anyone else. While black triggers are definitely stronger than regular border triggers, like Crollo's power, they have a difficult setup, but unlike his, their powers are limited and have a clear weakness. Fujin has 11 ribbons that can extend slashes, but once he's used up all of them, he has to recharge them, and his weapon is reduced to a regular sword. Yuma's trigger is a little more powerful, but most of its individual abilities are very similar to regular triggers. Bound is like a stronger grasshopper that can only be created one at a time. Shield is like a shield. Chain is like an advanced spider. Anchor is like a lead bullet without a shot. Bolt is like asteroid. Boost, Gate, and Echo are unique, and the trigger can also copy, multiply, and combine its attacks. The trigger as a whole also relies on replica, an outside source of help, to function well. Elector has the weakness of its attacks only touching Treon and being slow. Aragonon's blades move in a somewhat predictable pattern. Spiracea's portals take a lot of Treon, and its spikes can't pierce a rabbit's armor. Vorphoros has his Treon supply system as a weak spot that will defeat it if hit. Additionally, the users of black triggers need to be compatible with the creator's personality to even use it. All of these triggers have exposable weaknesses, which have been utilized in the story to great effect. I'll move on to Hunter x Hunter. I still agree with everything that I said about the basic abilities. They give characters a less creative playing field when any character can use the base abilities and their Hatsu. It eliminates potential creative situations like Haki in One Piece. Zetsu, Ren, In, Ko, Shu, and more could all have been characters' unique Hatsu. This is even proven by enhancers, as they basically use a spin-off of Ko. But this chance is squandered by allowing anyone to learn them. Border's basic triggers can be used by anyone, but only 8 out of several can be used at a time, allowing for unique combinations and making the fights more creative and interesting. For Crollo's powers, they do have 4 steps to initially stealing the Nen ability as a con, but later, his ability becomes unbalanced. It initially has the huge pro of being able to copy an unlimited amount of abilities. Another con was that if the original user dies, he loses the ability, but then this con is turned into a pro, when it is said that if the Nen becomes stronger after death, he keeps that ability, and presumably the stronger version. He starts off with a con of needing to keep the book open on the page of the ability he's using, meaning that he can only use one at a time, and only one hand is free. With Double Face, he can bookmark an ability, allowing him to use the ability while the book is closed, now getting rid of the one hand drawback. It also gets rid of the one ability at a time drawback, because he can have the book open to another ability. This ability was not only his own ability, but it decreased the previous drawbacks without adding another. It is purely positive. Furthermore, he can have the effects of multiple abilities active at the same time despite not being on their page or bookmark. Examples are Order Stamp, Black Voice, Sun and Moon, Gallery Fake, and Convert Hands. This pro significantly reduces the weight of the 2 abilities at a time con. There is nothing hinting that there's a limit to the amount of effects from different abilities that he can have active at the same time. Yet another pro. Moving to the actual stolen abilities, Order Stamp allows him to give the stamped person an order. The cons are that it can only give a simple order and it cannot control corpses, so when the puppet is killed, the ability stops. The pro is that it can control over 200 people and that it can control Nen copies of corpses, countering its second con. There is also the con of the commands needing to not go against the person's will, but this can also be countered by using words like break instead of kill. When you look at the pros versus the cons, it becomes clear that Crollo is unbalanced. Next is Meruem. His problem isn't a result of the power system, so it isn't really relevant to the argument, but he is still written as an unbalanced character. I discussed my problems of his abilities along with the other Chimera ants in my analysis on the arc he appears in, if you are interested. Next is Limits. In my Chimera ant video, I went into detail about how limits can be so unbalanced and Gon's limit power up specifically. What I didn't cover was Kurapika's limit and other abilities, which are also unbalanced. The first problem is that his biggest con is basically non-existent. Kurapika cuts off his lifespan whenever he uses Emperor's Time, but these effects cannot be acknowledged by the viewer as we don't know his lifespan. They also don't play a role in his fights because so far, he has never actually suffered mid-battle because of this. He doesn't experience any drawbacks in the present, only the future. Therefore, his vow basically has no drawbacks that the opponent can take advantage of during battle. The only time his drawback will become relevant is if we actually see him die mid-battle due to overusing it. But even then, that doesn't make up for the technical lack of a drawback in all of his previous fights. For the pros, he can use all Nen types force and accuracy at 100%. Chain Jail has the pros of being unbreakable and shutting down the target's aura. The only limitation is that it can only be used on Phantom Troop members. The pros are overpowered, especially the absoluteness of his durability, and the con is barely an issue, especially for his character. Judgment Chain can only be used in Emperor's time, but it is still broken. When it enters the target's heart, he can give them an order, and if broken, the target dies. He also has a minimum of 2 commands. The only cons are that he has to be in Emperor's time, and he can presumably only use it one at a time. Once again, the pros heavily outweigh the cons. Next is Steel Chain. By piercing a target, he forces them into Zetsu and steals their ability. Additionally, the target's death doesn't make him lose their ability. So far, the only limitation that it has is that he has to stab the target. With Stealth Dolphin, Kurapika can use a stolen ability, which comes with a full breakdown of his rules. He can use it for himself or give it to another person, including non-Nen users, just by stabbing them. The Dolphin tells the person how to use the ability too. The ability is fueled with the Nen of the original users. The biggest con in this ability is that it can only be used once, and then it is returned to the original user. Having to be in Emperor's time would be another weakness, if the lifespan drawback was actually relevant. My last criticism of Hunter x Hunter is the actual Hatsu. People will have you believe that Nen has the most creative powers in anime, but this is actually easily debatable. Like most power systems, Hunter x Hunter has some really cool powers, but it also has some really boring and simple ones as well. Killua, Kurapika, and Hisoka have very creative abilities that can be used in cool ways. Other power systems do as well. One Piece has Luffy's gears, Naruto has Kamui, Sage Mode, and Clone Jutsu. JoJo's has Crazy Diamond, Gold Experience, and Stone Ocean, and that's just to name a few. Nen also has some not so creative abilities as well. Silva, Zeno, Gon, Razor, and Uvogin all have basic abilities. As I said, most power systems have highs and lows. The most creative thing about Nen is the base abilities that are accessible to anyone, but other stories like Naruto and Jujutsu Kaisen have also implemented a concept like that, and arguably better, because the abilities aren't so broad that they could actually be a character's unique ability. Moving on to JoJo's, stands still have some very unbalanced abilities. The world can stop time, with the only drawback being that it is limited to 10 seconds. There is nothing like a cooldown, or limited amount of times per day. BIG was basically so invincible that it had to be thrown into the ocean. Made in Heaven accelerates time with no perceivable drawbacks, making it the worst offense. The lack of power development is also a hindrance. Other stories are allowed to keep the same protagonist for hundreds of chapters without the fights getting stale because of power development. Apart from being cool and enhancing the power system, JoJo's lack of power development means that the only way it can avoid the fights getting stale over a long period of time is by changing the main cast every part. If JoJo kept the same cast for hundreds of chapters, this flaw would become very noticeable. Araki seems to have noticed this when he temporarily added power development to Part 7. A system like triggers, however, can continuously keep fights fresh by experimenting with different trigger combinations, individual fighting styles, and team fighting styles. Lastly, FMA. The story basically restricts each character to one type of alchemy, which then forces the author to make them use the same attacks in every single fight. Of course, the author could just make more creative situations and tactics like World Trigger, but since she didn't, this flaw has to be held against the story. If Ed fought more, and, like with JoJo, if the story went on longer with the same cast, this flaw would have become very noticeable. The problem could have easily been fixed by allowing characters to use multiple types of alchemy and introducing more creative types. The Raildex universe has many creative scientific abilities, so FMA doesn't have the excuse of being restrained to science. Learning new types could have been used as power development, adding some cool into the power system. In conclusion, Triggers is still the best power system because of its coolness, creativity, flexibility, longevity, and balance.